The watch ticked on. It did not hesitate, did not falter, and did not know that the wrist beneath it had long since stopped stirring. It measured each second with the same crisp dedication, oblivious to the stillness that now surrounded it. Tucked beneath a neatly pressed sleeve fastened at the third notch of a worn leather strap, it kept its promise to count the minutes, to hold the rhythm, to keep time even when time had in every other sense let go. It was an old watch, not antique, not rare, but well-loved. Its face had small scratches and a thin hairline cracked near the edge that caught the sunlight just so. The glass curved slightly, like watches used to, and the numbers were not digital, but printed in a soft serif font that spoke of gentler decades. The ticking was quiet but firm, like a heartbeat far away in a quiet room. No one had wound it in days, maybe weeks, but still it went on, powered by the subtle science of motion, remembered by springs coiled long ago and not yet released. It didn't need attention, it only needed time. And time, though everything else had stopped, still echoed faintly in the chamber of its gears. The wrist on which it sat was no longer young, but neither was it worn by age in any harsh way. The skin was soft and still bore the faint tan line of days spent outdoors. A fine dust had settled along the knuckles. The fingers curled inward slightly, not from pain, but from peace. A hand that had, it seemed, simply come to rest. The watch clung gently, faithfully, unaware that the arm would not be lifted again. The room was quiet, but not sterile. It was lived in. A wooden chair sat by the window, worn smooth at the arms from decades of leaning. On the table nearby lay an open book, its pages splayed like wings. A teacup, cold now, sat undisturbed. The curtains moved gently in the breeze, filtering late morning light through a lace pattern that danced across the floor in silence. Time, in this room, had not vanished. It had merely changed its shape. Once, this room had echoed with footsteps, with a low, familiar creak of floorboards and the rustle of sleeves, with the clearing of a throat, the turning of a page, and the tiny clink of a spoon on porcelain. It had known speech, but more than that, it had known presence. The kind of presence that doesn't announce itself but simply fills the space slowly, fully, without demand. And the watch had always been there, in the background, worn to work, to walks, to dinners, and to quiet afternoons, ticking not as a reminder of urgency, but as a quiet partner to life's pace. It had been checked occasionally, when the bread needed to rise, when the bus would come soon, and when the sky looked like it might darken before evening. But mostly, it had ticked unnoticed. That was its nature, to keep going whether it was being watched or not, to mark every second as equal, regardless of how the world felt about them. Joy, sorrow, boredom, anticipation, the watch treated all moments with the same even beat. Even now, with no eyes watching, it ticked on. It did not know that the letters on the nearby desk would no longer be written, that the list tacked to the wall, pears, ribbon, one light bulb, would remain unfulfilled, that the scarf on the hook would not be worn again, that the soft music once played at dusk would not play again, that the hand it clung to would not lift another cup, would not turn another page. It simply counted time, not with grief, not with triumph, just with constancy. Outside, the world continued. Birds perched and preened on telephone wires. Neighbors passed by, unaware. Somewhere a bus hissed its brakes. Somewhere a kettle began to boil. Somewhere a laugh startled a room into warmth. Life continued, unknowing, as it always has. But in this room, the stillness was complete, and the faithful watch beat on within it. People would come soon. They would enter quietly, their voices lowered. They would notice the things left undone. The second slipper is still beneath the bed. The half-crossed T in the note by the phone. The photograph in the frame is slightly askew, as if last adjusted by someone preparing to leave and forgetting to return. Someone would touch the wrist. They would see the watch. They might press it gently, out of instinct. They might feel the ticking. They might pause and wonder how long has it been still here, ticking? How long since the last movement of this hand? Has the watch marked the very last second? Or did it carry on, unaware, long after the story had finished? They might even remove it, not right away, perhaps days later, when the drawer is open and the shirts are folded and the books are boxed. They might slip it off the wrist slowly, the way you remove something sacred. They might hold it in their palm and listen, as if trying to hear not the time, but the echo of what once lived beside it. And perhaps they'll decide to wear it, not out of sentimentality, but out of something quieter. Reverence, a way of keeping pace with someone who can no longer walk beside them. A way of wearing time not just as a measure of moments ahead, but as a memory of the ones already past. The ticking, still soft and regular, would follow them into new days, onto new wrists, into lives not yet lived. It would not change its rhythm. It would not ask for meaning. It would simply continue, turning seconds into presents. That is what watches do. They do not mourn. They do not hope. They mark. And so, long after the movement has stopped, the watch remembers. It remembers. Not through words or pictures, but through its simple insistence on continuing. Through the small, soft beat that does not call attention to itself but fills the silence anyway. In this way, it becomes not just a measure of time, but a companion to it, a quiet witness, a quiet survivor. A watch, still ticking, on a wrist that will not move again, becomes something more than metal and spring. It becomes a testament to the hours that came before, to the life once carried by the wrist it circled, to the grace of something continuing even when it no longer has to. And so, the room waits. Not for anything, really. It simply holds its stillness, like a breath that no longer needs to be released. The light continues to change on the curtains. The air stirs gently through the open window, thus falls slowly in golden strands, and the watch, faithful, unaware, keeps time, softly, steadily. Still, there is a peculiar hush in a room where shoes wait, a kind of stillness made heavier by anticipation that was never resolved. Along the wall, neat rows of footwear sit in silence, boots with scuffed toes, sandals that never kiss sunlight, and polished dress shoes dulled not by use, but by waiting. They face outward, toward a door that no one opened, a threshold no one crossed, and still, they wait, as if the journey might yet call. There are stories in those souls, the kind told not in movement, but in pause, in the breath before the step, in the imagined travels that filled hearts but never filled luggage. They were packed with intention, tied tight with resolve. Their leather flexed as they were tried on in front of mirrors, chosen carefully for the imagined terrain ahead. But then something happened, or maybe nothing did. The letters didn't arrive. The weather turned. The moment passed. And so the shoes remained, not abandoned, not forgotten, simply paused. Each pair carries a different might have been. The hiking boots, still dustless, dreamed of alpine trails and pine needle floors. The child sneakers barely worn whisper of schoolyards not yet played in, fields never raced across. The elegant heels, tucked neatly in their box, imagine laughter echoing through a ballroom, a slow dance, and a return home beneath streetlights. The heavy work shoes belonged to someone who once said, maybe next week, and never found the next. They sit together like artifacts of imagination, vessels of plans deferred. It is a strange tenderness to keep the shoes even when the path vanished. It speaks of hope that hasn't quite given up, a hope preserved, not out of delusion, but out of reverence, because something was real in the wanting, in the preparation, in the laying out of garments and the vision of departure. And maybe that was enough. Maybe readiness is a kind of journey too. Sometimes, it isn't fear that halts the journey. It's timing or illness, or obligations rooted deep in the soil of everyday life. Sometimes it's a single phone call. Sometimes it's simply the slow erosion of urgency, replaced by the quieter call of routine. And so, the shoes remain lined up, gathering not dust, but meaning. The room is quiet now. The light filters in through sheer curtains, casting long slants across the floorboards. It touches each pair differently, highlighting the shine of one, the stitching of another. and the faded logo on a child's Velcro strap. The shoes sit like an audience awaiting a curtain that never rose, and still, they face the door, as though the call to adventure might yet arrive in a gust of wind, and the ringing of the forgotten landline in the hall. And yet, they are not sad. There is no bitterness in their stillness, only dignity, because to prepare for a journey is itself a kind of belief. To polish the leather, to tighten the laces, to test the fit and imagine where they might take you is an act of hope. Even if the journey never begins, the hope was real. The preparation was sacred. The possibility was alive, if only in the heart. The shoes remember. They remember the day they were brought home, taken carefully from boxes, and tried on with smiles and hesitation. They remember the comments, "I'll wear these when we go up north. These are for the new job. He'll grow into them by next summer." The shoes heard the dreams before the dreams slipped into silence. Now, they stand in quiet companionship, a timeline of what might have been. There's a pair of ballet flats that never touched the studio floor, rain boots that never met puddles, loafers meant for interviews that never got scheduled, slippers bought for hospital visits that never came. Each one has a heartbeat stored somewhere in its art, somewhere beneath the tongue. Each one was chosen with a future in mind. And though the future changed, the shoes stayed, because some part of us holds on. We line them up not just for convenience, but out of quiet reverence. We see them each day and remember the part of ourselves that dared to hope, to imagine, and to plan. Even if life went elsewhere, even if we stayed, even if we never laced them up again. Some might call it foolish to keep what wasn't used. But is a dream worthless if unfulfilled? Is a suitcase packed and never opened a failure? Or is it a relic of something deeply human, the desire to move forward, even if we don't? The shoes speak softly to that. They do not demand movement. They only bear witness to the version of ourselves that was ready, that was willing, that almost went. Sometimes, on a quiet evening, the floor creaks as if with phantom footsteps, as if someone, somewhere, stood again in front of the row, hand hovering above a favorite pair, thinking maybe, just maybe this time. But the moment passes, and the shoes remain. Their quiet persists, gentle as breath, constant as a memory. In homes like this, shoes become more than utility. They are symbols, thresholds, stories lined up like chapters never open. They ask nothing. They accuse no one. But they hold space for what was once possible. And that, too, is sacred. There are other journeys. Journeys inward. Journeys through grief, through aging, through caregiving, through staying put while the world spins madly on. Maybe the shoes were left behind because the soul went walking in different ways. That required no footwear, only endurance, only silence, only the kind of strength that keeps you rooted. And so the shoes waited, not resentfully, but patiently, because they knew the heart had its own path. And if one day someone came to slip them on again, they would still be there, ready, steady, and forgiving. And perhaps someone will. Perhaps a child will grow into them. Perhaps a widow will open the closet and finally find herself ready to go to the places she only saw in his stories. Perhaps a friend will find a pair that fits and carry forward the journey someone else could not finish. Perhaps they will remain exactly where they are, and that too will be fine. Not all paths are walked. Some are dreamt. Some are left for others. Some are simply held in the shape of a soul, in the bend of a tongue, or in the alignment of shoes lined up in quiet rows by the door. And in that alignment, in that mute, dignified readiness, there is something profoundly human. The enduring belief that maybe, someday, the door will open, and if it does, the shoes will be there, ready. There is a quiet sort of tension in the presence of a pen filled with ink but never used. It is the stillness of potential unspent, of language not yet born, a breath held indefinitely, waiting for the courage to release. On a desk long cleared of clutter, neither busy nor abandoned, there rests a pen, its body polished, its nib sharp, its reservoir dark with readiness. It waits, quietly, on the edge of something. The paper beside it is untouched, smooth, uncreased. Its edges are neat, as if afraid to invite even a fold without permission. The two pen and page sit like figures in a conversation not yet begun, full of things to say, but locked in the space before the first word. The moment before the meeting of ink and fiber is not empty dotted hums. It listens. It holds more than silence. These are not the tools of neglect. The pen is not forgotten. It is checked often. Uncapped now and then to be sure the ink hasn't dried and the tip isn't clogged. Paper is replaced regularly, even if not used. The blank sheets are fresh ready, like beds made daily, despite no guests, like a kettle filled in case someone wants tea. These gestures are not wasted. They are quiet acts of hope. The desk may sit near a window, where the light changes slowly through the day, silver in the morning, golden in the late hours, and blue and soft at dusk. The pen catches these colors and reflects them in its surface. The paper glows and dims with the passing of time, recording the light instead of words. Shadows drift across the page like quiet thoughts not yet captured. And still, the pen waits. There are many reasons a letter goes unwritten. Sometimes there are too many words to fit into lines. Sometimes they're too few to even begin. Sometimes the act of writing feels too final, as though setting something in ink might solidify feelings that prefer to remain shifting. Like light on the wall, or perhaps the person the letter was meant for has drifted too far, and the words have no clear address anymore, not because they are gone, but because time has rearranged where closeness once lived. It's not procrastination. It's not forgetfulness. It's not avoidance. It's reverence, a sense that the words must be right. That to write too soon would be to miss the mark entirely. And so the pen stays full. The ink remains patient. It doesn't dry up in frustration. It simply waits, knowing its moment might come or might never. Knowing that readiness is its own kind of purpose. Some pens have carried ink for decades. Never uncapped in haste, only with intention. The ink inside doesn't complain. It darkens slowly. It deepens. It becomes more than pigment. It becomes memory, waiting for a shape. There is something holy in this restraint, something sacred in the fact that it hasn't been used just for the sake of being used. In the quiet of late night, this waiting takes on a hum of its own. A desk in moonlight, a pen that gleams faintly in the cool and direct glow. A page that remains blank not because it is empty, but because it is holding space. A letter unwritten is not a failure, it is a promise not yet fulfilled. And that promise, even in its stillness, is tender. Perhaps the letter was meant for someone long missed. Perhaps for someone not yet met. Perhaps for no one but the self, a version of oneself that once existed, or one that is still forming. A letter, after all, is not always meant to be sent. Sometimes it is meant to be written just to know what's in the heart. But even the truth requires the right moment, the one where emotion and language finally meet in a way that feels safe, clear, and worthy. There is a drawer near the desk filled with old letters, some finished, some torn up, some only half begun. Their ink has bloomed on the page, smudged by fingertips or moisture or doubt. They are fragments of thoughts that once tried to leap from the self into permanence. They rest now, quietly, beneath the fresh stack of paper. Like elder siblings who once tried and now wait, encouraging but quiet, and above them, the pen waits still. It knows what it holds. Every line that might be written, every name that might be addressed, every feeling that's too much to say aloud. It holds heartbreaks that have not been shared. Gratitude is never spoken. Apologies were never delivered. Love never declared. It holds all of it, without leaking, without fading, without pushing. The house around it lives on. Clocks tick. Windows rattle gently in the wind. Tea cools in forgotten cups. Life continues without letters. But the pen remains, and in that steadiness, it offers comfort. There is no urgency in its presence, only potential. The permission not to speak until the voice feels certain. Some days, a hand hovers above the pen. Fingers brush it. It is lifted and weighed gently in the palm. It is uncapped. A line is made a name, perhaps, or a word, or just a loop, a testing of motion. And then the pen is set down again. Not in failure, not in regret, just with a soft decision. Not yet. The paper, too, offers no resistance. It accepts the absence of words without shame. The world often asks us to speak before we're ready, to respond before we understand. But a pen full of ink that has yet to begin writing offers another truth. That readiness is not about urgency. That pause is not the opposite of progress. That waiting can be a form of devotion. The ink in the pen is dark, quiet, and still. But it is alive. It does not know when the first letter will be drawn. But it does not despair. It understands the value of being prepared, of being present, of being ready. It is not wasted just because it has not been used. And when if the first letter comes, it will come softly. It will be a stroke like breath, a mark like a ripple. It will begin not with a grand proclamation, but with something small, a name, a date, a moment, and then the rest will follow, or not. Perhaps that single stroke will be enough. Even a single mark, after such stillness, carries immense meaning. But until then, the pen stays full, the paper stays blank, and together, they hold the possibility of everything that might one day be said. As you drift now toward rest, imagine this desk, the pen, the quiet of the room, the softness of evening settling in. Let yourself be like the pen, full of quiet, full of breath, full of feeling that needs no expression just yet. You are not behind. You are not late. You are simply paused, not stuck. And when your hand is ready, your voice will come. But tonight, you can simply wait, still, present, complete, even in your silence. Like a pen full of ink, like a letter not yet begun. The book lay open, not by accident, but by a kind of agreement. It rested on a side table, worn at the spine. Its pages curled slightly at the corners, one page on the left, one on the right, and nothing more. The air around it had shifted with the seasons. Dust settled, light changed angles, and shadows came and went. But the book did not close, and the page did not turn. It had once been read, truly read. The margins bore evidence, tiny notes in pencil, the kind made gently, tentatively, not to interfere with the story, but to nod at it in quiet understanding. A word is circled here, a phrase underlined there. No grand declarations, no exclamations, just the faint presence of someone who, at some point, had wanted to remember something. But that was long ago. Now, the book had become more of an object than a narrative. It was a fixture, a silent witness. It lay open day after day, to the same paragraph, the same sentence, the same mid-thought. Perhaps it was a story, perhaps a collection of poems, perhaps something too old for the genre. It didn't matter anymore. The words had outlived their urgency. Time had passed around the book, like water around a rock, flowing, shifting, softening, but never quite eroding it. There was something reverent about its position, unmoved even by routine. It had not been picked up in years, yet no one dared to close it. To close it would feel like erasing something, like ending a conversation mid-sentence. The open pages carried an expectation, a breath held not for the next moment, but for the one that had already arrived and simply decided to stay. No one quite remembered how it had come to rest there. Maybe it was put down in a hurry and forgotten. Maybe it had been intentionally opened to that page, left as a reminder of something important, an idea, a memory, a person. Or maybe it had been discovered one day, already open, and people chose not to disturb it. Whatever the case, it had become part of the room, as inevitable as the light from the window or the faint ticking of the old clock. In the house, people walked past it daily. They barely glanced at it anymore, the way you stop noticing familiar things. But it was there, not always, like a low hum in the background of thought. The book didn't demand attention, and so it earned something greater, quiet respect. Sometimes a breeze from the open window would threaten to turn the page, lifting one corner like a question. But it always fell back again. It was as if the story had settled where it wanted to stay. The narrative had found its resting place. Maybe the story ended there, even if the text continued. Or maybe it paused not to be resumed, but to become something else. Something contemplative, sacred still. The room it lived in was not grand. A modest sitting room, lined with old photographs and furniture that remembered better days. The kind of room that smelled faintly of old paper and of time, that scent that clings not to objects, but to years. It was a room for slowing down, for remembering, and the book had become its quiet anchor. There had been readers once, a woman, mostly. She used to sit by the window with her tea, the book in her lap, her fingers curled gently over the binding like a hand resting on an old friend. She never rushed the story. She never read to finish, only to dwell. She read aloud, sometimes not for others, but for the room, for the walls, for the light that filtered through the curtains like dust made visible. When her voice no longer filled the space, the book stayed. She had placed it on the table one evening, open to the page she had just finished, perhaps intending to return in a moment or a day or a week. But time played its trick, and the return never came. Yet the book remained, faithfully open, as if keeping vigil. People came and went. Visitors looked at it, considered closing it, then changed their minds. Something about its stillness felt sacred, like walking into a chapel mid-prayer. To turn the page felt like interrupting. To close it felt like forgetting. Years passed, and still it waited. There is something remarkable about a story left unfinished, not by oversight, but by choice or fate. A page turned halfway between discovery and conclusion becomes a kind of shrine. A frozen sentence becomes a monument. That page, whatever it said, had become enough. It had earned its place, and for those who noticed, really noticed, it became a question. What line was worth staying on for years? What sentence, halfway down the left-hand side, had captured a life so completely that even time chose not to move past it? No one read it aloud anymore, but some would lean close, letting their eyes trace the words like relics. They would not finish the chapter. They would not peek ahead. There was reverence in not knowing. There was intimacy in the restraint, because the act of not turning the page can sometimes be the truest form of remembrance. Children grew up in that house, learning not to touch the book, not because they were told, but because they understood. It became one of those things children instinctively regard as important without needing explanation, like graves or lullabies, or the way grandparents sometimes look at empty chairs. The book was not read anymore. It was kept, and the words, those aging, browning words, remained exactly as they were. Their ink faded slightly with sun and breath, but the meaning, whatever it once was, had grown. A sentence left untouched gathers layers like sediment. It becomes not just a line in a story, but the story itself. Evenings fell softly on that page. The room darkened in slow degrees, and still the book lay open. Morning arrived with a slow creep of sunlight, warming the page gently, like a hand on a shoulder. And in the hours between, the book lived a life that no one witnessed, but everyone respected. Eventually, the room emptied. Time does this gradually, gently, as though apologizing for its work. The chairs sagged a bit more. The floorboards creaked a little louder, and the book remained. Some things do not need movement to endure. Some things are because they were. The book had once been read, fully, hungrily, with heart, and that was enough. It had given what it had to give, and what remained was not the next page, but the one already open, the one chosen, the one stayed on. People moved through the house later, unsure of who exactly had once lived there, but moved by something they couldn't name. They'd see the book pause, smile faintly, and leave it open. They knew. Somehow, they always knew. There is grace in returning to the same place again and again, in finding that one moment, that one page, and letting it be, letting it hold you, letting it speak slowly, across yours, through stillness. Not rushing forward, not seeking more. There is something sacred about the moment we decide that this is where we'll stop. Not because the story is over, but because we found something worth sitting beside. And so, the book opened to the same page for years and remained not as a story paused, but as a life remembered, as a breath was still held, as a line that did not need turning. Because some endings do not arrive with final pages, but with a quiet decision not to turn them. It hung in the hallway where the light barely reached, catching only faint outlines during the day and none at all at night. The mirror was old, not ornate, not grand, not framed in gold leaf or garnished with flourishes, just plain wood or on a pane of silvered glass, dulled with age. Its corners were flecked, its surface blurred by time, and the clarity it once offered had softened into something less precise. And still it reflected, but not in the way mirrors are expected to. Not with flattery, not with an invitation, not with suggestion or instruction. It reflected simply because that was its nature, whether anyone wanted it or not. Most passed by it without pause. The hallway was narrow, the wall a bit warped, and the mirror leaned ever so slightly to one side as though even it had grown tired of trying to stand up straight. But sometimes, a face would flicker across its surface. A shoulder, a hand, the back of someone who forgot it was there. And in those quick glimpses, the mirror did not lie. It didn't soften wrinkles or brighten eyes. It didn't angle the jaw to elegance or brush the dust from coats. It didn't care what it caught or who had come before. It simply held the truth, quietly, which is perhaps why people stopped really looking into it. There are some reflections no one asks for, not because they're frightening, but because they're real. Real in a way that stings, not with cruelty, but with unvarnished honesty. And the hallway mirror, the one that had been there longer than most of the furniture, longer than the routines people kept, longer than many of the stories they still told, it had become one such reflection. At one point, it had hung in a bedroom. That was long ago, when the mirror was younger, and so were they. It had once seen people preparing for their day, brushing hair, tying ties, checking smiles before stepping out. There had been a purpose and its use back then. Purpose and a kind of hope. But mirrors age, just like people do. The silver beneath the glass corrodes, the light in the room shifts, and what once seemed clear becomes softened at the edges. Like memory, like time itself. And now, the mirror revealed things no one asked it to show. A sag in the shoulder from years of carrying what no one could name. The way a mouth turned downward, not from sadness, but from repetition. The slight drag in one foot, unnoticed by the person themselves until they saw it replayed there in glass. There was nothing cruel in these observations. The mirror offered them gently, but plainly, the way a tree offers shade without asking if you meant to rest beneath it. The mirror didn't suggest change. It didn't whisper, "You could look better." It simply said, "Here you are." And sometimes, being seen like that so precisely, so without judgment, was harder than being ignored. So they stopped lingering. They stopped facing it directly. They moved past it like one might move past a gravestone, acknowledging its presence, but not inviting a deeper conversation. A glance, a flick of recognition, and then onward to the kitchen, to the next room, to the next obligation. But still, the mirror remained. Still, it reflected. When no one was in the hall, it caught the dust dancing in the light. It held the outline of the coat rack. It was noticed that the door was left ajar. It noticed everything and spoke of nothing. It had once shown the curve of a child's face, their sticky hands pressing against the glass. "Who's that?" the child had asked once, giggling. And a mother had said, "That's you, silly." But children grow up and stop asking questions with laughter in them. They stop looking at mirrors as puzzles and start looking at them as verdicts. Slowly, they just stop pausing before it. Years passed. People left. Some never came back. Still, the mirror did its job, not with pride, but with consistency. Even when no one needed it, even when no one wanted it, there were moments, though quiet, unexpected ones, when it became more than an object. Late one evening, she passed by with a blanket in her arms and paused. Just for a second, the hallway was dim, but she caught her outline there. Not her features, just the soft shape of someone carrying warmth from one room to another. For a breath, she stared, not at herself, but at the motion, the gesture, the silhouette of kindness. And perhaps, in that moment, the mirror reflected not what needed to be seen, but what had gone unseen for too long. All the unnoticed tenderness, the quiet labor, the silent, repetitive kindnesses that don't announce themselves. The mirror remembered them. It always had. It remembered the early mornings, when a tired man adjusted his collar in silence. It remembered the way someone once leaned against it, forehead resting against cool glass after hearing bad news. It remembered the shadows of dancing feet when music played on the radio and no one was watching. So while it reflected what no one needed to see, it also preserved what everyone had forgotten to. And maybe that was its gift, because there is a loneliness in aging that mirrors catch before anyone else does. Not just the wrinkles, but the gaps. The ones where someone used to stand beside you. The one toothbrush instead of two. The empty hookwear coat no longer lives. Mirrors see these things without commentary. Without pity, they just witness. The hallway mirror bore witness. Not loudly, not insistently, just quietly, silently, constantly. And in its way, it became sacred, not because of what it showed, but because of what it remembered. It became a vessel for all the glances that never turned into conversations, for all the truths too delicate to speak aloud. And so it stayed. Some wanted to take it down. It's crooked. It doesn't show much anymore. We could replace it. But they never did. Maybe they knew. Maybe, somewhere in them, they understood that some mirrors aren't there to flatter or correct. Some are there to hold the residue of living. And this one did. It held the years that sagged quietly into the hallway like a breath no one let go of. It held the reflections of those who no longer walk past it. It held the truth, not the kind people ask for, but the kind that sits softly in the corner of a room, humming with memory. So when you pass a mirror and don't look, it still sees you. When you avoid your own eyes, it doesn't close. It waits. Not to be needed, just to be present. And sometimes, long after the last light is out and the last voice is quiet and the hallway is still, the mirror remains, reflecting nothing and everything. It happened quietly, as most things do when no one is watching. A shift, a change, a small erosion of what once was that left no clear line to mark the moment it turned into something else. You might sit in a familiar chair one afternoon and look up, only to notice that the light falls differently now, that the tree across the street is shorter somehow, or that the shoes by the door haven't been worn in weeks. You pause. You open your mouth as if to ask, but the question dissolves before it's formed. When did that happen? It's a question we carry more than we speak. It lives in glances, in the way we linger on an object that used to mean something we can no longer name. It sits quietly behind the eyes, behind polite conversations, behind our rituals of dusting and folding and passing through rooms we used to sit in more often. It isn't urgent. It doesn't press. It just remains suspended, like a note never struck, a door never fully opened. That in question is rarely one thing. Sometimes it's the change in someone's voice, a tone you hadn't noticed before, slower, maybe, or softer. Sometimes it's the crack in a teacup that wasn't always there, or the absence of a laugh at a moment where one would have risen naturally in years past. You can't be sure. You tell yourself you've imagined it, and so the question stays silent. The living room still looks the same, mostly. The cushions are where they've always been. The photos on the mantel remain in careful arrangement. But something has shifted, and you feel it before you understand it. The silence between things is longer now. The air feels more still. You reach for something to anchor you, but everything is where it should be, and yet nothing is quite how it was. There are signs, yes, but they come too slowly to track. A plant that's outgrown its pot. A newspaper subscription that no one renewed. A drawer once filled with receipts now holding only the quiet weight of nothing. And sometimes, it's even less than that. It's the way someone no longer says goodnight in the same voice. Or how the clock ticks louder now, or perhaps your ear has simply grown quieter, more attuned to what remains. You want to ask someone, gently, curiously, when did that happen? But to speak it aloud would make it real. And so you carry the question like an object in your pocket. Something you rub your thumb across from time to time, but never show anyone. You think of the sweater at the back of the closet, the one that once smelled like autumn air and would smoke. You haven't worn it in years, but when you touched it last week, it no longer carried that scent. When did that happen? You didn't notice the change. You didn't see the moment it slipped away. It was there, and then it wasn't, and something in you grieved not for the sweater, but for the certainty you used to have that things stayed the same until they didn't. There's a crack in the pavement on the walk home. You're sure it wasn't there before, but maybe it was. Maybe it's always been there, widening slowly, and only now did your eyes choose to see it. You wonder how many things have changed right under your gaze, how many friendships softened, how many routines then, how many moments slipped by like pages fluttering too quickly to read. You recall a voice once familiar, a laugh you haven't heard in a while. You wonder when the last conversation was, not the last memorable one, but the actual last. You didn't know it at the time. You thought there would be another. There always had been. But now, when you try to remember the final exchange, your mind gives you silence. That silence holds the unspoken question. When did that happen? Not all shifts are marked by events. Some are marked by absences. And some absences are so quiet they go unnoticed until they've grown roots. You walk through your home and notice things that used to matter, a postcard stuck to the fridge, with a fading magnet, a bowl that hasn't been filled in a while, a book left halfway open on a shelf, and the bookmark untouched for months. Each item whispers a variation of the same question, as if they too are waiting for you to notice. It isn't regret that fills you. Not exactly. It's something gentler, more patient, a soft ache, the kind that doesn't demand fixing. The kind that simply wants to be seen. There is a photo in a drawer, half out of its sleeve. The corners are curled. It shows a face you know well, but not quite as they are now. The eyes are younger, the background unfamiliar. You study it for a moment, try to line up what was and what is. There's no answer, only the sensation that something occurred while you weren't looking. That time passed through the seams and changed the shape of things. You think of how quickly a child's voice deepens, of how someone who once stood with shoulders tall now leans when they walk, of how the handwriting in birthday cards grows more careful, then more faint. The questions pile up gently, like snow on a windowsill. When did she stop using that perfume? When did he start pausing before answering? When did this house become so quiet? But no one asks these things aloud. We are trained not to. We nod through change. We move around it. We learn to make tea instead, to fold the laundry, and to vacuum in straight lines. We let the questions remain unspoken not because we don't care, but because we care too much to say them out loud. Because to ask is to notice, and to notice is to admit that something has shifted without asking our permission. Still, the questions linger, not as burdens, but as shadows, not as regrets, but as soft hauntings. They remind us of our own impermanence, of the way even the solid things bend with time. And they ask us without asking to pay more attention, to slow our steps, to look more closely, to say the small things before they become echoes. There is beauty in that, too, in the almost asking, in the reverent silence that surrounds the unspoken, in the way we notice the curve of a teacup, or the weight of a familiar blanket, or the faint scent of soap that reminds us of someone who no longer lives here. And one day, when someone else pauses, glances at something long familiar, and suddenly change, they too will carry the question in their chest, gently, like a paper folded many times. When did that happen? And they will not say it out loud, but they will feel it, and in doing so, they will remember not the moment the change occurred, but the shape of what came before it, and perhaps that will be enough. There is something reverent about an old map creased from years of folding, smudged at the corners from fingers stained with ink or dust, its paper thinned in the places most frequently traced. These were not just objects of direction, but of longing. Someone once unfolded it with a breath caught in their chest, eyes scanning roads or rivers in search of an answer, a plan, or an escape. The edges curled like parchment in heat. Its symbols were quiet, precise, yet filled with possibility. And now it sits forgotten in a drawer that no one opens, or pinned to a wall more as decoration than guide, or tucked between the pages of a book last read during a storm. The places it marks still exist, perhaps. Or perhaps they've changed, grown, been renamed or reclaimed. Borders redrawn, roads rerouted, cities swallowed by expansion or emptied by time. And so, the map no longer matters, not to the world outside, at least, but it still whispers to anyone willing to pause long enough to listen. It speaks not of where you should go, but where someone once hoped to. There is dust on its surface, yes, but beneath the dust lie intentions, journeys once imagined, circles drawn in pencil or on distant towns, lines marked in highlighters showing the most efficient or the most scenic route, notations in margins, overnight here, or ask about local food, smudges from coffee spills, from hurried fingers, from years of being folded and refolded as if the act of folding it just so would summon movement. It was once essential. Before apps, before GPS, before the world compressed into blue dots on glowing screens, maps were companions. You had to sit with them, spread them out across your lap, across the hood of a car, across a kitchen table late at night. You had to learn them to tilt your head, to run your finger along a highway's arc, to imagine the terrain beneath its lines. And in that intimacy, you formed a kind of pact with the future. I will go here. I will follow this. But some journeys never happened. Life redirected. Plans dissolved. The time never came. Or it came, but with different roads, different needs. The map stayed behind. And over time, its function shifted. It became a relic, not useless, but unclaimed. No longer a navigator, but a witness. A quiet testimony to intention. Like shoes never worn or letters never sent, the map bears the trace of desire, of wondering what else there might have been. You can find them, sometimes, in boxes in the attic, folded tightly, brittle at the creases. You unfold them with care, as though touching something sacred. The names leap out first: Cairo, Manitoba, Marsalis, Topeka, Ulaanbaatar. Some known, some unfamiliar, some imagined through stories never read aloud. You see a line of small towns along a river, a set of mountains drawn in tidy humps, a ferry crossing marked with a faded symbol. These are not just marks. They are the echoes of curiosity. And even if the map no longer matters in a practical sense, it matters still in another way. Because it proves someone once looked outward. Someone once believed in departure, in direction, in the ability to move from here to there and be changed by it. The map holds within its folds 1,000 silent thoughts. I wonder what it's like there. What if we took this route instead? If we leave at dawn, we can be there by nightfall. Maps are dreams drawn in lines. And when they are no longer needed, their silence is not empty, it is full of all that they carried. The roads imagined but never traveled. The corners of the world marked with question marks. The detours never taken. The roadside diners never visited. The motels circled in pen but never slept in. The map remains still, but it's thick with movement that never was. You may hang it now in a frame, or you may leave it folded out of sight, but it lives, not as a guide, but as a ghost. Not a haunting, but a companion in quiet times. There is comfort in seeing a place laid out like that, even if you'll never go, even if the route is now wrong, the name's outdated, the scale laughable, and an age of satellites. Because the map does not ask for action. It does not scold. It simply says, you once thought of this. You once believed the world could be known, and perhaps the belief alone is enough. Sometimes a child will find it, unfolded on the floor, and point to a lake with a strange name. Where's this? They'll ask, and no one will know. Not exactly, but the sound of the name will be enough to stir something, an image, perhaps, or a half-remembered plan. In that moment, the map lives again, not because it provides direction, but because it holds wonder. And maybe that's what we miss. The way a map required our imagination. How it asked us to meet it halfway, to picture the landscape, to feel the rise and fall of hills just from their lines, to think not just of where we were going, but how we would get there, what we would pass, what might delay us, what might surprise us. Now, the map is silent, but not empty. It has filled with the richness of what never was and the quiet dignity of holding on to it anyway. There's no shame in a path untraveled, no waste in a plan that changed. The map does not mourn. It does not measure its worth in footsteps taken. It is content to have been part of the process, to have stirred the heart, if only briefly. And perhaps, in some quiet way, the map is still guiding, not across land, but across time, back into the version of ourselves that once dreamed of the road. Back to the night we stayed up late circling city names and saying, what if? Back to the place where wondering itself was enough. That part still matters. Maps may fade, their colors dim, their lines smudge, but they hold a record of that wondering. They remind us that there was once a moment when we believed in the beauty of somewhere else, that we held the world in our hands, folded tightly, and believed it could be opened. And now, even in their silence, they serve us still, not by pointing us outward, but by reminding us of what lies inward. The desire to go, the courage to imagine, the grace to stay when staying was the harder thing, the ability to dream, even if just for a moment. These are not small things, and so the maps remain, tucked away or spread across walls, sometimes mistaken for decor, but always more than that. They are stitched with memory, with might-have-beens, with the soft ache of dreaming. Maps that no longer matter. They matter still, just not in the way they used to. There are some changes so small, so quiet, that they happen without witness. The shifting of dust in sunlight, the slow bloom of steam from a cup long left untouched, the soft reset of a clock's hands as they find their way back to zero. These are not loud things. They do not call attention to themselves, but they happen all the same. In one such room, time had always passed softly. The furniture had not been moved in years. The curtains swayed only when the windows were left ajar, which wasn't often. A faint scent of wood polish and paper lingered in the air, the legacy of rituals long since abandoned. And against the far wall, mounted just above eye level, hung a clock round, plain, with hands that ticked more slowly than one might expect. Its face was slightly yellowed. Its numbers were soft around the edges, like memories that had been touched too many times. No one had looked at that clock in ages. It was not checked to mark appointments, nor was it consulted to see how late or early the hour had become. It had become a background presence, like a painting or a chair, part of the room, but no longer commanding the attention it once had. Its ticks, once heard clearly, now blended into the hush that surrounded the space. But the clock still moved, quietly, faithfully. Its gears turned behind the surface, hidden from sight, but certain in their rhythm. And on one unmarked morning, one that began like all the others, the clock reset itself. No chime announced it, no flicker of light or dramatic spin of the hands. Just a smooth, small movement, a realignment, a return to the beginning. The minute hand slid forward to midnight. The hour hand followed. A quiet recalibration. A breath drawn in the machinery of time. And yet no one watched. No eyes caught the moment it happened. No hands clapped for it. No journal recorded the event. And still, it happened. That, perhaps, was the most beautiful part of it. There's something achingly tender about the way time continues, even when it is not seen. The way moments rearrange themselves, offer fresh beginnings, and perform their silent miracles without asking for recognition. The clock did not wait for applause. It did not need to be thanked. It simply knew what it was made to do. Elsewhere in the house, life remained unchanged. A book lay open, but unread. A cup of tea had cooled beside it, the steam having long since drifted away. Dust motes swam lazily in a shaft of light that angled through the window, painting the carpet in slow-moving gold. The air held a stillness, but not an emptiness. A kind of fullness, actually, of things waiting, things tending quietly to themselves. The clock ticked on. It had, at various times in its life, marked birthdays and bedtimes, meals and departures. It had ticked during laughter and silence alike. It had witnessed arguments held just beneath its gaze and lullabies sung in low voices, under its soft, watching rhythm. But those moments were past now, and still it stayed. Still, it moved. Still, it kept its time. No longer for people, perhaps, but for the principle of time itself. And now, it had reset, begun again, whether by battery or by some inner design, or simply by instinct. The clock had chosen to start over. It had not waited for the room to be full. It had not waited for someone to count the hours with it. It had done so quietly, gracefully, and without asking. There is something beautiful in the idea that not all new beginnings need to be seen. That something can return to its start without fanfare. That healing, or change, or growth can happen in a room with no audience, under the gaze of no one at all. So much of life is lived in the visible, the celebrated, the measured. We mark our days with milestones and candles, calendars, and alarms. We celebrate when something shifts, when someone witnesses our change. But there are other kinds of change, quieter ones, the kind that happens when no one is watching. The kind that happens deep inside, like a decision not spoken aloud, like a forgiveness whispered into the dark, like a clock quietly resetting itself simply because it was time. These changes are not less real. They are, in many ways, more sacred. The house, around the clock, understood this. It did not need noise to feel full. It did not need motion to feel alive. The creak of a stair, the sigh of old floorboards beneath the weight of time, the shift of light along a wall, these were enough. Enough to say, something is still here. Something is still becoming. The clock did not ask the room to change with it. It simply changed, and the room, respectful and still, allowed it. And though no one saw it happen, the moment left a mark. Not a visible one, but an atmospheric one, a subtle shift in the feeling of the space, a kind of invisible exhale, as if the room, too, had been holding something. And now, gently, quietly, it let it go. Time is not always about movement. Sometimes, it is about presence. The awareness of a moment in its full, quiet being. The awareness that something has turned, even if no one saw it happen. That's what the clock had offered, proof that things begin again, whether or not we notice, whether or not we feel ready. And that's what makes the reset beautiful. It reminds us that fresh starts are not always marked with celebrations. Sometimes they arrive in silence, when no one is paying attention, when the room is still. Sometimes we wake up and feel without knowing why that something has shifted, that the clock inside us has returned to zero, that we, too, have quietly begun again. You may carry such a clock inside you, one that resets not with alarm bells, but with gentle, hidden clicks. One that has turned through years of your life, unobserved but faithful. One that, now and then, begins again without asking permission. You do not need to catch it in the act to know it happened. You will feel the freshness in the hours that follow. You will feel the quiet spaciousness of a day that has returned to the beginning. Even now, as you lie still, breathing softly in the hush of your room, something inside you may be resetting. No witness required. No audience needed. Just the smooth realignment of thoughts. A loosening of some internal grip. The sense that tomorrow does not need to be the same as yesterday. That time, in its wisdom, has already turned the page for you. And so you rest, not rushed, not behind, just in step with the rhythm of something greater than noise. You rest as clocks reset themselves in empty rooms, as beginnings happen in silence, as time continues, not for display, but because it knows no other way to be. And when you wait, you may not remember this moment. You may not remember the way the hands turn, the quiet shift that occurred, but you will step into the new day already part of it, already changed, already gently begun again. The clock will keep ticking, and you will walk with it, not to catch up, not to stay ahead, but to move softly in time with something that keeps beginning, again and again. Whether or not anyone watches, it did not announce itself with fanfare or finality. The century and entire period, heavy with its own collected breath, sat in the corner of a quiet room, not hidden, not displayed, but simply waiting. It had folded itself neatly, the way an old coat might rest over the back of a forgotten chair. It had gathered its years, its victories, its dust, and its wounds into a stillness so complete that it seemed almost invisible. Almost, because once you saw it, once your eye caught the outline of something too complex to name, and too patient to explain. You understood. Time had not gone. It had settled. It had not passed. It had paused. It had not vanished. It had chosen a corner. The room was not a museum. There were number placards, no velvet ropes, no documentation. Just a space worn smooth by life. The kind of space that held echoes of footsteps long dispersed and conversations that never quite left. In that space, the century waited. It did not speak, but its silence was crowded. One might think a century is too large a thing to wait, that it must rush forward, burning with progress, filled with the urge to unfold itself into the next epoch. But this one did not. This one had been left behind not because it was unwanted, but because no one remembered to return for it. Like luggage at the edge of a platform, like a letter slid behind a drawer, like a legacy without a reader. It was not bitter. It had known too much to be bitter, but it was keenly aware of its disuse. There had been a time when it was all anyone spoke of. The century, new, unfolding, feared, revered. The bells had rung for its arrival. The headlines had flared. Hands had shaken over its promises. People had placed their hopes into it like seeds into soil. And for a while, it grew chaotically, beautifully, destructively. It grew with machines and maps, with war and peace, with music pressed onto wax and silence broken by radio static. It grew through revolutions of spirit and substance, through paper turned to code, through cities pulled taller by dreams and debt. And then, the newness wore off. Other decades came, newer ones, louder ones, and slowly, the century grew quiet. It began to sit more often. It leaned against the walls. It listened instead of speaking. It found corners. It waited. That was how it came to rest in this one, the back corner of a modest room, where the wallpaper curled slightly and the baseboard bore the scuff of many shoes. The century had folded itself into that space the way old things do without permission, but with perfect belonging. Not everyone noticed it. People entered the room and walked past it, carrying mugs and burdens, looking for keys or meaning. The century never interrupted. It simply sat, its posture not weary, but composed. Its breath is slow, its hands, if it had them, resting on its lap, as if holding something it was ready to give away if only someone would ask. There was dust on its shoulders. That did not bother it. It remembered everything. It remembered the children who had grown old and the elders who had outlived their memories. It remembered the cities built over ruins and the ruins that had never been touched. It remembered the speeches never delivered, the love letters never sent, the monuments built to moments already misunderstood. It remembered the click of typewriters and the first digital sigh of modems. It remembered shoes worn down by marches. It remembered rooms just like this one. It did not mind being remembered, but more than that, it longed to be claimed, not as an object, not as a relic, but as a story. You see, the century was not just time. It was not just numbers on calendars or wars in textbooks. It was personal, deeply, intimately personal. It lived in diaries, in ticket stubs, in the smell of rain on sidewalks that no longer exist. It lived in glances shared between people who are no longer here. It lived in voices left on tape. It lived in the dust of books whose authors had been forgotten, but whose phrases still lingered in someone's speech, unknowingly borrowed. It sat in the corner, not because it was past, but because it was unclaimed. Because it was waiting for someone to notice it, not with scholarly eyes or clinical gloves, but with the kind of gaze that recognizes something once felt but long buried. Sometimes, the door to the room would creak open. A child might wander in, looking for nothing, and the century would perk up quietly, subtly, a small shift in posture, a flicker of memory rising in its stillness. But the child would glance once, see only shadows, and move on, and the century would settle again, waiting, not demanding attention, only presence. Every century must decide how it will end, not with the turn of a calendar or the drop of a ball in a city square, but with how it chooses to be remembered or forgotten. This one had chosen to wait, to offer itself not as history, but his inheritance. If someone would only ask, if someone would only sit beside it long enough to listen. But people are often too hurried to notice stillness, and stillness is the only language a century knows how to speak. The corner it had chosen was not symbolic. It was practical. It was where no one looked, and so it could remain undisturbed until it was truly needed. Because someday, someone would feel the presence in the room. They would sit, not for reason, but out of some inner gravity, and they would begin to speak or to write or simply to remember without knowing why. And the century would respond not with words, but with a gentle opening. Not a creak, not a flash, but something quieter. A knowing, a warmth that begins behind the ribs. A thought that has no beginning, but feels like it has always been waiting for form. Because centuries do not disappear. They do not end. They pause in corners until we are ready to return. And this one, it still waits, not mournfully, not impatiently, but with the dignity of something that once held millions of lives, and now asks only to be seen again, not as time passed, but as meaning waiting. So the next time you enter a room and feel the air grow thicker, the silence grow deeper, not heavy, but held, look to the corners, not the shelves or the mantels, not the walls hung with achievement or ancestry, but the corners, the unassuming places, because time folds itself there, because meaning waits there, because a century, your century, might still be sitting there quietly offering its lap full of years, and all it's waiting for is someone to say, I remember something. It had gone missing quietly, not with a clang or a shatter, not with a note pinned to the door or an absence so loud that it filled the room. It simply ceased to be where it once was. At first, no one noticed. After all, when something has been in the same place for so long, it becomes less an object and more a shadow, something assumed rather than observed. It blends into the backdrop of ordinary life. It stops drawing attention because it has always been there, and always being there creates a kind of invisibility. That was the beginning of its disappearance, not the moment it was lost, but the moment people stopped remembering that it was there. It had once been important. That much is certain. There had been a time when it was dusted, polished, and repositioned with care. It had served a purpose, not one shouted or framed with gold, but one folded into routine, into familiarity. It had sat near the window, or perhaps by the door, or maybe in that small alcove beneath the stairs. Its precise place doesn't matter now. What matters is that once, it had a place, and now, it did not. No alarm was raised, no search was mounted, no questions floated up through the air. And that is perhaps the most sorrowful kind of loss, the kind no one notices. Somewhere in the folds of time, it had slipped out of reach. Maybe someone moved it. Maybe it was borrowed and never returned. Or perhaps it was simply misplaced among 1,000 other quiet things that vanish every day. A misplaced note, a single sock, a photograph slid behind a drawer. But this was different. This had meaning. Only no one remembered what the meaning was. Its absence was soft, like a chair no longer sat in or a voice no longer heard in the kitchen. Life filled in around the missing space, as life always does. Dust settled, light shifted, shadows stretched into the vacancy and made it their own. And still, no one looked for it, because the world rarely stops for what is small and steady. It stops for crashes, for cries, for things that break loudly. But this thing had not broken. It had faded. And that is how many things are lost, not in a storm, but in stillness. There were hints, of course. An old photo, slightly askew, showed it in the corner. What was that? Someone asked once. But the question fell away like a leaf not caught by the wind. Or perhaps it was mentioned in passing. We used to have, followed by silence, the sentence forgotten halfway through. Sometimes, memory behaves like fog rolling in, thick and gray, then vanishing again before you can grasp what you thought you saw. And so the memory of it, whatever it truly was, became less a recollection and more a shape of feeling that something was missing, but not enough to stop the day. Perhaps it was a box of letters, or a clock that no longer ticked, or a book whose spine had cracked from too much use. Perhaps it was a painting of someone long gone, or a bowl kept not for use but for the way it had always been there. It doesn't matter, because whatever it was, it had carried the weight of quiet meaning, and now it was gone. There's a certain grief that arrives not with the loss itself, but with the realization that no one mourned it. The sorrow doesn't scream. It doesn't demand answers. It just sits there, like an old friend you forgot to call, and now you're not sure if it would even matter if you did. The house moved on. People passed through. Rooms shifted in their arrangements, and still, no one looked for it. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know to care. That's how time works. It makes room for the new by gently sweeping away the old. Even when the old had once been beloved, years passed. Dust settled again. Not on the object itself, it was no longer there, but on the silence that grew around it, and somewhere, tucked into the edges of memory, there was a faint pulse. Not quite a recollection, more like a hum. The kind that only makes itself known when the house is very quiet and you're standing still, and you suddenly feel like something should be in your hand, but isn't. That hum is what remains. The echo of something meaningful that wasn't given a goodbye. And that is the ache at the heart of it all. Not just that it was lost, but that it was lost without witness. That its absence was not met with questions. That its quiet service ended not with gratitude, but with forgetfulness. Still, it had existed. Still, it had meant something. Still, it had shaped the days in small, invisible ways. And maybe, one day, someone will open an old box in an attic, and maybe, tucked beside yellowing papers or under layers of dust, it will be there. And maybe, the person will hold it in their hands and say, softly, "Oh, I remember this." But even if they don't, even if it stays hidden forever, it mattered. It mattered not because it was extraordinary, but because it was present. It had been there. It had stood quietly through seasons, through changes, through silence and sound, and through joy and sorrow. And that is worth something, even if no one looked for it, even if no one remembered to say goodbye, even if the world went on, as it always does, folding over the absence like fabric pulled over a bed. Still it mattered. And perhaps, somewhere in the deep hush of forgotten things, it knows that, and that is enough. It played long after they had gone. Notes hung in the air, faint but full, suspended in a space that no longer remembered the hands that once coaxed them into being. The music drifted like memory, weightless, bodiless, but real, filling corners and crossing thresholds, sounding out in places where no instrument sat, where no one waited for applause, where silence had long since taken up resonance and made its peace. There had once been a quartet in the parlor, the kind that gathered every other Sunday without fail. They would tune carefully, quietly, with the same ease and rhythm as setting a table or lighting a lamp, not for concert halls or ovations, but for themselves, for the ritual of harmony, a breath shared and bowed strings trembling in sympathetic agreement. The chairs remain in that room still, empty, but not forgotten. Their legs scuff the floor with a certain pattern, and if one listens closely, they echo the timbre of a cello warming its voice. No one plays there anymore, and yet the air remembers. Music lingers differently than voices do. It doesn't need a body to anchor it. It doesn't require breath or lips or fingers. Once released, it belongs to the room it entered. It hides in the plaster and waits behind the molding, inside drawers that no longer open, behind glass panes dulled by dust and time. Sometimes, if the afternoon light strikes at the right angle or the wind slips through the window just so, you can hear it again, not with your ears, but in the bones of the house. A piano sits in the hallway. No one knows the last song played. The keys still respond, soft beneath hesitant touch, but it resists being awoken now. It's grown accustomed to rest. Sometimes, when someone passes by too quickly, One key clicks as if in protest or maybe invitation. The sound startles, not for its volume but for its clarity. It reminds the listener that there was once music here, not digital, not distant, but real living, and immediate, pulled from the air itself. And now, all that remains is the echo. There is an old radio in the kitchen round knobbed, with its numbers half faded and its speaker faint as a whisper through a wall. It hasn't worked in years, yet someone still turns the dial from time to time, as if expecting it to find its voice again. And sometimes it does not with news or speech or weather updates, but with a bar or two of melody, so brief it could be mistaken for memory. But it isn't memory, it's the ghost of song. A few notes strung together from nowhere, filling the silence like dust motes floating through sunlight elsewhere in the house. The music takes different forms, a hum in the radiator, the sigh of wood contracting with the evening cool, the rhythm of footsteps no longer climbing the stairs but somehow still sounding in sequence. The walls breathe it in and out. The silence, too, participates, humming gently between the echoes, keeping time like a metronome held by an invisible hand. A music box rests unopened in a drawer. Its key remains wound, though no one wound it. Now and again, in the hush before dawn, it begins to turn slowly, carefully spilling a few hollow, tinkling notes into the dark. Not a full song, just the beginning, just enough to remind someone awake too early or too late that not all melodies need an audience. Some exist only to prove they still can. Music without musicians becomes something else. It becomes a presence, not haunting, but abiding, not performative, but gentle and unspoken, like a lullaby remembered just well enough to hum. It takes the shape of the place it fills. In the attic, it is the soft shuffle of paper. In the basement, it is the drip of old pipes and rhythm. In the hallway, it's the creak of the floorboard known too well to be startling on a more strings or bang tune now. No fingers curled in position, no breaths held before the downbeat. But somewhere, always, something plays. A resonance in the bones, a vibration just below the threshold of attention. Music that needs no instrument, no skill, no sound, even. Only presence, only memory, only stillness where once there was rhythm. Sometimes someone visiting might ask, is that a record playing? And the answer is always the same. No record, no playlist, no speaker. Just the house, just the room, just the sense that something once cherished has lingered longer than anyone expected, and longer than anyone asked it to. The rooms do not perform, they simply remember. On one shelf, tucked between books, lies a violin string snapped long ago. Its curl has faded, but the tension it once held remains in the air around it. You can almost hear what it meant to carry sound. And near it, a sheet of faded notation handwritten, with careful rests and sharp signs drawn as if in prayer rests beneath a paperweight. No one reads it, but no one throws it away either. It matters that it remains, because the absence of musicians did not still the music. It changed it, made it quieter, more patient, more willing to wait. There is a chair in the back room with a cushion worn in the exact shape of someone who used to sit there, evening after evening, strumming something soft and wordless into the warm air. The chair now sits in the corner, covered with a shawl and mostly forgotten. But the silence in that corner is different. It carries rhythm in its stillness. You can sit there and feel it, the hush of practice repetition, of comfort wrapped around sound. Outside, the wind catches the chimes on the porch. Their notes clash sometimes, not unpleasantly, but in a way that feels accidental, unwritten, yet somehow right, as though even the wind knows the measure. It knows when to pause. It knows the value of a held note. The world is filled with music left behind, hymns that outlived their singers, whistles on hillsides where no shepherd walks, lullabies hummed into quilts and coats and the corners of baby rooms now emptied. Each one persists not in noise, but in impression. Music without musicians is not a loss. It is an offering, the kind that asks nothing in return. It's a melody carried forward without ambition, without ego. A trace of beauty is placed gently into the world and allowed to remain there, even when the hands that shaped it have long moved on to silence. If you close your eyes in the right kind of stillness, you can feel it. The unresolved chord. The phrase that ended mid-note but still lingers in the body like warmth. The breath before the next bar that never came. It is not unfinished. It is merely endless in its way. Music without musicians does not stop. It simply disperses. Like ink in water. Like light at dusk. It spreads thin but never disappears. You hear it in the way someone closes a door gently, not wanting to disturb a quiet they don't understand. You hear it in the pause between sentences, in the shush of someone setting down a mug with care, in the way someone clears their throat before saying nothing at all. This is where it lives now. Not in concert halls, not in stages, but in the lived-in silence that has been shaped by sound, in the absence that still hums with presence, in the notes that were played and those that were not but should have been. And that, too, is a kind of music, one that cannot be composed, only kept, only felt, only held, in the softest part of the evening, when the sky no longer asks to be noticed, and the air is still enough to listen. They stand in quiet corners and along forgotten roads, buildings once filled with noise and movement, now softened by the slow weight of time. Their walls are not empty, they are full of memory. Even if no voice calls out across their threshold, even if no one has stepped through their doors in years, they remember. They remember everything, especially the names. Names are no longer spoken aloud. Names that once echoed down halls were called up staircases, whispered behind doors, signed in chalk on slate boards, carved into wooden desks, or stitched into laundry tags left to dry in morning sun. Names that pass between lips with familiarity, with fondness, and with formality. Names said in anger, in jest, in love. Names shouted across playgrounds or softly uttered into pillows at the end of long days. Names that belonged to people who once mattered, if only here, in this place. And the buildings remember. Their bricks do not forget the rhythm of footsteps or the specific weight of someone leaning against a frame. Their windows have seen the same hands open and close them through countless seasons. Their doors have creaked in exactly the same way beneath the same familiar push. Inside these buildings, the air is still shaped by those who breathed it before. And if you stand quietly, you might feel it the way the space seems to shift slightly to accommodate a presence no longer there. Because long after the people leave, the buildings remain, not just in structure, but in spirit. The walls hold conversations like pressed flowers, fragile, flattened, but intact. They carry the last laugh shared in the kitchen. The argument was never quite resolved. The lullaby was sung in the nursery. The announcement was made from the porch steps. The knock on the front door came too late. The silence that followed it. Time peels the paint. Yes, it wears down the floors. The roof may sag, but the essence lingers. Especially in buildings where no one comes anymore. Especially in places left to themselves. The post office closed after the last letter was sent. The schoolhouse where the bell stopped ringing. The inn that hasn't welcomed a guest in decades. The chapel where no one has knelt in years. The farmhouse was abandoned after the family scattered like seeds in the wind. They sit and they remember. Not grand things, though some witness history, but small things, personal things, names whispered only once and never again. Names that belong to those who lived lives too quiet to be written down, but too real to be erased. There's a house somewhere with a child's drawing still taped to the refrigerator. The crayon colors, faded and curling. The drawing is unsigned, but the house knows who made it. It remembers the hand that pressed it to the door, the way the child stood back and smiled at it. There's a shop whose windows reflect nothing now but the shifting sky, but it still knows the name of the woman who came every Wednesday at noon for bread. It remembers her footsteps and the pause she made before saying thank you. There's a theater where dust lies thick on the velvet seats, but it remembers the performer who stayed late to rehearse again and again, long after the audience had gone home. It remembers their voice, the way it cracked slightly at the same note every time, and the breath they held before the final line. These are the names that no one speaks, not because they were unworthy, but because time moved on, as it always does. People left, Generations turned over. Papers were filed away or lost. Photographs faded, and the names slipped into silence, carried only in the folds of forgotten buildings. But silence is not the same as absence. Within these places, the names are not gone. They are imprinted in the grain of the wood, in the dents on the banister, and in the scuffs on the floor where a chair was dragged day after day. The buildings remember, and they do not ask to be remembered in return. They do not cry out. They do not mourn. They simply wait in the way that only buildings can, with quiet patience, with steadfastness, with an unwavering presence that does not demand attention, but offers it anyway. They wait, holding within them a kind of prayer, not for revival, but for recognition, not to be filled again, but to be known for what they once held. If someone were to step inside again to brush away the dust, to breathe the still air, they might feel it, a pressure in the chest, or a sudden welling of unplaceable emotion. They might say, "It feels like someone just left," or "There's something about this place." They wouldn't be wrong, because the building has not forgotten. It remembers the man who sat in the same chair every morning, smoking the same pipe, looking out the same window. It remembers the girl who cried on the third step after her first heartbreak, the couple who danced in the kitchen while soup boiled over, the grandmother who read letters by the fire, whispering each word as though summoning the writer back into the room. The names of those people are gone from the record. They are not in archives, not in books, not etched into stone, but they live here, in the way the floorboard creaks at a particular spot, in the smell that lingers even after the walls have faded, in the touch of light that falls exactly on the chair by the window every afternoon at the same time, just as it did when someone used to sit there and hum to themselves. Buildings are not alive in the way we are, but they have memory, and memory, when left undisturbed, deepens. It becomes a presence, a hush, a kind of gravity that draws the soul inward, until one can almost hear the murmurs of lives long past, until one can truly feel the invisible threads that still stretch across the room. Threads woven from names no longer spoken aloud, but names that mattered. Once, someone wrote a name on the underside of a desk, just a first name, in pencil. It's still there, faded but legible. No one will erase it. No one has. Perhaps no one ever will. It wasn't meant to be seen, but it was meant to be remembered, and the desk remembers. So does the room, so does the house, so do the walls, the rafters, and the very bones of the place. This is how we live on. Not always in stories told or names carved in marble, but in the memory of spaces that held us, in the air we once warmed with our presence, in the buildings that keep our names tucked into their corners like forgotten notes. They do not speak these names aloud. They do not need to. They carry them the way we carry the scent of someone we love on a scarf or a phrase. That reminds us of home, quietly, without spectacle, with reverence. So if you pass a building half sunk, shuttered, hollow-eyed, do not call it empty. It is full of names that no one says but which still echo inside like soft footsteps on old wood. The building remembers, and because it remembers, a part of the person remains. There are voices in the world that no ear is trained to hear, not because they are silent, but because they do not speak in the ways we expect. We listen for conversations in the hum of daily life, in the rise and fall of words between people, and in the way music filters through a crack in the door. But there are deeper languages, older ones, spoken not through lips or ink, but through stone, plaster, wood, and silence. There is a language spoken only by walls, not whispered, not shouted, but there, always there, in a room long since emptied of voices. There stood for walls quiet, unmoving, and yet profoundly expressive. They did not creak with protest or lean with fatigue. They stood straight, but not severe. Their paint, once bright, had faded into muted hues of time shades that light barely noticed. One corner held the ghost of a nail, where something once hung. The upper trim bore a faint crack, not from damage, but from age. And across the span of each surface, small, nearly imperceptible patterns, lines, dents, and patches of color, where sunlight had struck unevenly over the years. To the hurried eye, they said nothing. But to someone who paused, who truly listened, the walls spoke. They remembered. They remembered the laughter of a child who used to run from one end of the room to the other, breathless with some game whose rules only they understood. They remembered the hush that fell during long winter nights, when candlelight fluttered against the plaster and everyone spoke softer for reasons they couldn't explain. They remembered arguments, too muffled but sharp. They remembered the silence that came after, when no one wanted to speak first. And they remembered the reconciliation, when the silence was broken not by words, but by footsteps that came close again. Walls absorb the resonance of presence. They keep what we forget. They memorize the contours of a moment, the way a shoulder brushed against them during pacing thoughts, the rhythm of a chair rocking nearby, and the hush of a hand pressed to them when someone leaned their weight, not for rest, but for grounding. And after everyone leaves, the walls do not forget. They are the keepers of the unspoken, the ones whose names are no longer spoken aloud, the keepers of lullabies hummed once and never again, of sighs released into the air when no one was looking, of things lost and things remembered and things no one else noticed. If they had a voice, if their language could be translated, it would not come in words, but in warmth, a feeling that lingers in certain corners. A temperature shift when you pass near the place where someone used to sit every morning, or when a draft comes through the crack where secrets once lived. Their grammar is made of texture. A scuffed spot by the door where a bag always swung. A curve in the woodwork where someone rested their head one too many times. The slow sag of a shelf under the weight of years. Their vocabulary is silent but vivid. Light stains, softened edges, and thumb-worn corners. Their sentences stretch not in lines, but across time, whole paragraphs held in the space between a curtain rod and the dust above a frame. We do not always know we are hearing them, but we respond. We straighten a painting that no longer hangs. We place our hand on the wall and do not know why. We pause in a room we've passed through 1,000 times, suddenly filled with a sense that something or someone is still here. Not in the ghostly sense, but in the preserved, gentle way something becomes part of the structure. In some homes, these languages remain vibrant. A kitchen where generations passed recipes not on paper, but through movement, each cupboard touched in the same sequence, each door opened with a familiar tug. The walls hold that choreography. They recognize it. If you move out of rhythm, the drawer sticks, or the light doesn't feel right, not as punishment, but as memory asserting itself. In other places, the language fades. Abandoned buildings speak a broken dialect, still fluent, but lonely. They repeat the same phrases, the same sighs. They echo not because of emptiness, but because they miss being understood. Yet still, they speak. Even hotel rooms and offices, brief homes to transient lives, carry the beginnings of a dialect. A stain on the ceiling left by a guest who once cried through the night. A doorknob looser than the rest, turned too many times by nervous hands. Walls are fluent in our patterns. They are our secret historians. Sometimes, someone returns to a childhood home years after everyone is gone. They walk the hallways slowly, whispering to themselves things they cannot say aloud. And without knowing it, they begin to answer the walls in their native tongue, touching certain places, pausing at certain door frames, leaning against the kitchen counter in just the right spot. It's not nostalgia, it's conversation. The walls, of course, remember them too. There is a language spoken only by walls, and it does not ask to be translated. It only asks to be acknowledged, to be felt. You do not need to decode it. You only need to notice. Notice the hush that fills a room just before sleep takes you, when the world falls away and the only sound is the sound of stillness. Notice the way a familiar room feels different when a lamp is turned off or when a chair is empty. Notice the sensation of returning to a place after a long time and how your body instinctively slows down as if something around you is saying, "You're home." This language is not lost. It is simply quiet. It waits for stillness to speak. And now, as you lie in your own room, surrounded by walls that know you better than you realize, listen. Not with your ears, but with your breath, with your bones, with the part of you that remembers without being told. The walls around you carry your stories, both the ones you've shared and the ones you've kept to yourself. They do not judge. They do not rush. They simply hold. They have listened to your thoughts when no one else was awake. They have echoed the rhythm of your days. They have stretched and breathed with the heat of your summers and the silence of your winters. And in their own way, they are still speaking. Their words are shaped like calm, like continuity, like understanding. They say, you have been here. You still are. You do not have to speak to be heard. And so you rest, not in emptiness, but in quiet company. Let the language of the walls wrap around you now, not as noise, but as presence, as assurance, as something steady. Let them tell you stories not in sentences, but in stillness. Let them remind you that even in silence, you are not alone. Even in stillness, you are held. They have listened long, enough to know how to comfort you. And now they speak gently, patiently, with the steady breath of something built to last, saying nothing and everything all at once. There was a time when the gesture was automatic. The hand lifted not in thought, but in rhythm, reaching to light the lamp at dusk, to cross oneself. When passing the church gate, to wave to the same neighbor who always swept the same corner of pavement, to close a window just as the same breeze rattled through it each evening. These were not decisions, but repetitions, little acts etched into the fabric of daily life. The hands did not wonder why. They simply moved. But time passes in strange ways. One day, without a sound or a shift in season, the hands stopped rising. They no longer met the air with instinct. The gestures once sacred in their ordinariness faded, like breath on cold glass. And no one noticed the exact moment when the muscle of memory finally chose stillness over motion. Hands that once punctuated days now lie still, folded gently on laps, placed quietly on tabletops, or left hanging at one's sides like punctuation marks in a sentence no longer being spoken. Not in sadness, not in rebellion, but in the rest. There is something solemn about a hand that has ceased to move, not because it is lifeless, but because it carries the weight of all the times it did move. All the cups lifted, curtains drawn, candles extinguished, pages turned. These still hands bear the memory of 1,000 gestures, each one the small to be remembered, and yet now, in their absence, each one is felt. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about routine is that it goes unnoticed until it stops. The hand no longer rises to greet a morning that now arrives without ritual. The kettle is still, untouched. The radio remains off. The table remains set, just in case, though no one eats at it now. And the hands, those loyal executors of habit, rest in quiet rebellion against the endlessness of unremarkable days. It wasn't sudden. Habits unravel slowly, like threads from the cuff of an old sleeve. One day, you forget to do something. The next, you remember, but choose not to. And then one day, you no longer think about it at all. The hands do not mourn the shift. They were tired. Tired not from labor, but from the weight of repetition. From years of rising, reaching, arranging, apologizing, preparing, and performing. From carrying groceries and expectations. From folding laundry and emotions. From opening doors and closing conversations. So now they rest. There's a kind of dignity in it, in hands that no longer chase meaning in motion. They have made peace with their stillness. They no longer need to prove their purpose through productivity. They rest not as a sign of surrender, but as a statement of survival. A quiet refusal to move for the sake of moving. Others may see it as a loss, giving up. But that is because they do not know the full story of these hands. They do not know how many times those hands held grief without dropping it, or joy without letting it slip. How many secrets did they keep just by staying closed? How many times they trembled and still completed what was asked of them? How many doors they knocked on? How many tears they wiped away? How many heads they held while humming lullabies into the heavy dark. Hands like these deserve their stillness, and yet, even in rest, they remain expressive. There's a language to the way they fold, to the slight curl of fingers, the softness of a palm open against cloth, the way one thumb sometimes moves slightly, as if remembering the rhythm of a forgotten task. They are not idle. They are remembering. You can almost hear the echo of their movements in the quiet, the soft clink of a teacup set down just so, the rustle of pages turned with care, the creak of an old drawer being opened, the slow grace of a photograph lifted from its envelope. The memory of motion lingers in the room like dust in the afternoon sun, floating, suspended, real. And sometimes, without reason, one hand will twitch, just once, as though it dreamed of something it used to do, as though it reached for something that was always there, and then remembered it no longer needed to. There is a certain kind of wisdom in that. These hands have earned the right to be forgotten by the clock, to no longer be dictated by minutes and schedules. They rest as one rests in a home they built themselves, surrounded by the quiet evidence of their former labor. You may find them resting on the arm of a chair, lightly curled, or on a windowsill catching light. You may see them in black and white photographs, frozen mid-gesture, as if they were always moving. But now, here, in this hour of long stillness, they rest, not because they cannot move, but because they no longer have to. They have learned the rarest lesson, that sometimes the most meaningful gesture is no gesture at all, that there is reverence and restraint, that silence can hold more truth than repetition. And so, while the world continues its hurried choreography, the hands wait at the edge of it at peace. Somewhere, a clock ticks on, a kettle boils for someone else. New hands move through new habits. But here, in the room where time has softened, the old hands rest. They are not forgotten, only quiet. They still remember how to move. They still could. But for now, they simply don't. And in that stillness is a kind of triumph, subtle, sacred, and complete. Time doesn't always pass in grand gestures. Sometimes it seeps. It settles quietly. It softens its edges until the days begin to resemble each other. And in that sameness, something remarkable begins to happen. Centuries do not just pass, they settle in. They begin to live inside the things we stop noticing. The wallpaper was floral once, or perhaps geometric, or perhaps it was neither, only a soft wash of color with a border at the top, delicate and hand-painted. It's difficult to say now. The pattern has faded, browned at the corners, peeled in a few discreet places. But it is still there, not clinging dot, waiting, witnessing. At first, it was just wallpaper, freshly pasted, damp at the seams. The room smelled like starch and optimism, like glue and freshly mopped floors. Someone had stood in that room with a brush and a careful hand, smoothing bubbles, pressing corners flat. It was done with care, the kind of care reserved for things meant to last. And last. It did. A family lived there, then another, and another still. The room became a hallway, or perhaps it was always a hallway, a space passed through, not dwelled in, not lingered in, a transition, like dusk, like early spring, the kind of space people forget. They touched, but the wallpaper remembered. It remembered the weight of fingers brushing against it while someone stumbled home in the dark, too tired to find the light switch. It remembered children pressing their ears to it, listening to the sounds beyond the wall, grown-up voices in another room, whispers too quiet to understand. It remembered the moments no one else did. The century folded itself into the paper in layers. It pressed in through the sound of wartime news crackling from a radio, through the slam of a front door that never opened again, through the laughter of a child who ran in circles down the hallway until they outgrew the urge to run at all. Years became brush strokes. Memories became discolorations. Time became part of the texture. No one notices wallpaper until it's gone, or until it peels, enough to reveal something beneath. But this wallpaper refused to let go. It held on not just to the wall, but to everything. The sun had bleached it in places. Fingers had dirtied its edges. And yet, it endured. because it wasn't just decoration. It was a witness. There had once been a calendar tacked to it, perhaps in 1924, or 1957, or 1983. The nail hole is still there, and beneath that hole, if you peel back just the right corner, you'll find the version of the wallpaper untouched by sunlight, vivid, preserved, like a secret still whispering beneath the surface. There are names written in pencil in the lower left corner, small, neat handwriting. A child's. The names are faded, but not gone. They belong to people who have likely forgotten that they ever sat there, cross-legged, scribbling dreams into the wall. But the wallpaper remembers. The wall remembers. Because buildings are not empty. They carry things. They keep what we discard. They hold what we forget. The century arrived in moments, not movements. A candle was blown out and then replaced by a gaslight. The gaslight made way for a bulb. The bulb was later dimmed with a switch that someone installed who no longer lives. And all of these changes were watched, absorbed by the wallpaper. It knew how voices changed with each generation. It knew which footsteps came with anger and which with joy. It knew when someone paused beside it to cry silently, one hand on the wall for balance. It knew which night someone leaned against it to catch their breath just once. And grief fan never leaned there again. The wallpaper outlasted them all, not because it was strong, but because it was quiet. It did not demand attention. It was allowed to stay. Time doesn't always sweep things away. Sometimes it folds them into fabric, into paper, into walls. And if you were to press your ear to the wallpaper now, press it gently. With intention, you might hear the century breathing, not as sound, but as presence. It would not tell you what year it is, but it would remind you that it is all of them at once. The breathless years someone waited by the phone. The joyful years someone danced alone in the hallway because they had received good news. The hollow year no one entered the house at all. They're all there, folded not in creases but in color, in the way the pattern bends toward the floor, in the way light pulls around it at different hours of the day, in the way, even now, you could peel it back and discover not damage, but layers of existence. Perhaps one day someone will strip it, not in cruelty, but in necessity. And perhaps they will pause as it pulls away, noticing the mark it left behind not just on the wall, but in the room's memory. Perhaps they'll wonder what stories lived inside its silence. What moments did it witness that no one else remembers? What small things mattered once, folded carefully between fiber and paste? And if they're gentle and curious and slow enough not to rush the task, they might feel the hush of a century rising softly into the air, like dust illuminated in a shaft of window light. It will not speak in words, but it will be heard, because the wallpaper was never just wallpaper. It was an archive. It was a quiet testimony. It was the place where time curled up, made itself small, and stayed. And so the century remains not gone, but resting, not erased, but gently folded away, like a letter never sent, or a lullaby remembered only by the walls.